Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookishrealm and I am back with another video. So today is the weekly reading log number 4, but this is week 5 of the month. January was probably the longest month of this entire year. I saw someone had posted something at work that said we made it through the year, or we made it through January. What a year. January felt like it was literally an entire year. So if you're new here and you didn't know, I have changed the way that I do my wrap-ups because I, 1, talk entirely too much, and 2, read entirely too much. So it is difficult for me to do 2 videos a month where I'm doing a mid-month wrap-up and a final wrap-up because those videos end up being like an hour and some change long. It is easier for me if I do this on a weekly basis. At first, I decided to do the weekly reading vlogs, but then I found out that I am also not good at multitasking. So it was easier for me to do a sit-down video once a week. I typically film these on Saturdays and they go up on Sundays. So you can see from the title of this one, we are here to talk about some pretty interesting things. The 2 highlights being Pence's memoir, which was 21 hours long on audio, and the new book by Nick Brooks, which is The Promised Boys. I do not talk about any of the graphic novels, manga, or comics that I've read during the week on this channel. If you want to check that out, I have a second channel called The Realm of Comics. I do, however, mention what I have been reading. So this week was also a shorter week in terms of content for the comics, graphic novels, and manga. I ended up reading, I think, maybe 4 things this week. It was 4 things. Ironically, I never marked these things as currently reading, nor have I marked them as complete on Goodreads. So Goodreads is like my go-to in order to figure out exactly what the world I've been reading. And unfortunately, I have not updated any of that stuff yet, so I need to go back and do that sometime before the weekend ends. So I did end up reading Laid Back Camp Volume 4. I also read for the Realm of Comics Book Club Volumes 1, 2, and 3 of Radiant Black, which is such an amazing series. We had such a great discussion with all 3 of those volumes last week, so I'll make sure I link that somewhere in the card somewhere above if you are immediately looking for my reviews and thoughts, as well as Bree's thoughts and reviews related to those 3 graphic novels. But we're going to go ahead and jump into the books. I will have all of the titles timestamped down below if you're looking for a specific book. As always, like I said, if you are more comfortable with me breaking it up by age category, let me know. Right now, I just kind of do it in the order that I read stuff or how it appears. And that's what's been working for me, but I don't mind breaking it up by age category. So the first thing that I ended up reading last week was The Cruel Prince. When I did my video last week, I specifically talked about the fact that I had like maybe 5% of that book left, and I decided not to rush through and attempt to read it before I filmed that last video because it was already late at night. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about The Cruel Prince, which I ended up liking more than I anticipated. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It follows a character by the name of Jude, who unfortunately experiences both of her parents dying right in front of her. She's taken to this Fae world, and we're kind of thrown into this mix where we find out that she's trying to compete. There's a lot of lore and myth wrapped into it, a lot of secrecy and backstabbing, and a lot of you should not trust this person, or you don't trust anybody, you don't get attached to anybody. I think that for me, 1, I was not expecting to get as lost into the world as I did because I have never read a Holly Black book before, and I did not realize at this point that her writing is complete and total gold. So I was going into this thinking like, this book is super hyped, I'm probably not going to like it. And then when I actually picked it up, it was a story that I didn't want to put down, and that is a true testament to her writing capability. I really enjoyed the character development, specifically with Jude. I kept seeing in reviews like, oh, Jude is this badass character, and I was like, I don't know if we're reading the same story. But by the time we get to the end, Jude makes a couple of decisions that were kind of like, fuck your feelings, don't really care what you want, I want all the power and the glory. And I think that kind of took me by surprise. I am still not a fan of our Cruel Prince, Cardan. Cardan is definitely, to me, in some ways, a stereotypical YA male character, brooding, grumpy, but for some reason, all the women are attracted to him. So I'm not a huge fan of that, but I also realize that The Cruel Prince is not written for someone in my age group. It's definitely written for a teen audience, but I could definitely see the appeal of The Cruel Prince. I do think it's well written. I think it has a lot of political intrigue. I think it has very interesting character development. As always, with a lot of YA that I read, I can always do without the love interest and the bouncing around between who loves who, but I do like the fact that we get introduced to all of these characters. It's very much so a darker fantasy where you shouldn't get attached to anyone, you shouldn't trust anyone, and I think that I am very much so a person that enjoys political fantasy more so than what I anticipated. So I did end up getting the novella that follows Jude's sister, who I didn't care for. So it's going to be interesting to read a novella from, I guess, either her perspective or about her backstory. Interested in reading that one. And then I also realized after doing some additional reading online that her Fae series are interconnected. So I did get her first book in her Modern Fae, or I think it's a Modern Fae series is what it's called, but I did end up checking out that first book as well to kind of give myself the opportunity to delve into some of her backlist. But overall, solid read, and I did end up giving it 4 stars. The next book that I ended up reading this week was the second book in the Magic Treehouse series, which is The Night at Dawn by Mary Pope Osborne. This was not as interesting for me as the first one because, I mean, the first one was dinosaurs. This one we are looking at medieval times, castles. It kind of follows the same premise. We're still following Anne and Jack, who find this magic tree house. When they open up a book, it transports them into this different world. This one, they open up a book about medieval times, specifically a medieval castle following a knight, and they are transported to this castle. I think what I enjoyed a lot about this one is the further development of the characters. I really, and I called her Anne, her name is Annie. I really like Annie. Annie's more of a free spirit, go with the flow, I'm just gonna do whatever comes to mind, where Jack is very methodic in his thinking. And I think that Annie is such a good balance to him, because a lot of what they do in this book and how they get out of the situation that they're in is definitely specifically related to Annie's, like, okay, we're just gonna go with it and we'll make it work as we go. I do like the fact that we have this continuous mysterious element of this magical being, possibly with the letter M. We have a bookmark now that has that same inscription as the medallion that they found in the first book. So I'm just going to keep slowly chugging away at the series. I mean, these books started being published as early as like 92, 93. And so I'm looking forward to continuing my read of the series. Like, these take 30 minutes for me to read as an adult, but the illustrations are just as good as they were the first time. This is an older copy of this one, but I have to return it. Someone has it on hold, probably a kiddo who's looking for it. Okay, so after that I went on kind of like a black romance binge. I don't know what's been going on, but I've been in the mood for some romance, and so the next 4 books that I'm going to talk about are all romance books, 2 in the same series. One was a reread and one was a continuation of a series. Okay, so the first book that I ended up reading was Set, which is the first book in the Them Boys series by Alexandria House. Y'all know that Alexandria House is one of the few people who has written a male character that I have absolutely like adored and loved, and that was in, I forget the name, with the brothers, the 4 brothers. I can't believe I'm forgetting it. The first one is where the cover, it looks like Andre 3000 on the cover. But this is her shorter novella series, and it also follows 3 brothers. And the first one is Set. First of all, no one told me, I listened to this at work on audio. No one told me that the first scene of the book was our heroine getting her back blown out by the hero. Somebody could have told me that. And I did not know that was gonna be the first scene. And so I'm at work at my desk listening to this, and all I hear is, whose is this? She's screaming yours. And so that's the way that this one started off. I definitely had to lower the volume on my headphones when listening to this one, because I was so afraid that someone could overhear what I was listening to. So there's a lot of sex in this book. It's strong sexual content. she does have this listed, like, if you're not a fan of books that have strong sexual content, then this is not the book for you. And I must say, I completely and totally agree. Set and Karima end up meeting at a high school reunion of sorts, kind of. And I forget what year the reunion was, but Karima was supposed to be going with her close friend. Her close friend ended up bailing. So when she gets there, she sees Set sitting at a table by himself. Set had a pretty rough reputation when he was in high school. And so no one really wants to approach him or sit at a table with him when they recognize exactly who he is. And Karima ends up sitting with him, and they realize that they get along really, really well. They have this great chemistry, and they end up having sex that first night. And then it becomes an addiction on her end, where she would fly out to see him on the weekends, and they would basically spend the entire weekend having sex with each other. Over time, though, they realize that they have feelings with each other. This one definitely has content warnings for strong sexual content, as well as childhood abuse. And so the two really get to know each other on a different level. Karima's dealing with some backstory issues related to her daughter and the father of her daughter. It's some interesting dynamics there, where her daughter is having a lot of issues getting acclimated to the whole idea of adulting. And it's interesting because Karima and Set are both older, which I did like. These are older characters. They're both in their 40s at the time of this taking place, and Karima is a grandmother already because her daughter has had a son, and so she's trying to get her daughter back on track, and she's having a hard time. And her ex is kind of just, he wasn't involved when their daughter was growing up, and now he wants to be involved, and it's just causing so many dynamic issues. But these two have a difficult time kind of communicating their feelings for each other because of the experiences that they've been through, but eventually they do reach their HEA. I love this book. It was hot, it was sexy, it was interesting to listen to while working, but I really enjoyed it. Ended up giving this one, I believe, 4 out of 5 stars, if not 4.5. Okay, so the next one that I have is a Ashley Nicole book, which, if y'all didn't know, Ashley Nicole is one of my favorite Black indie romance writers. She is one of the few authors that I know of off the top of my head that makes me laugh out loud while I'm reading her book. So a while ago, I had started reading her Mason family series out of order because 2 of them are Thanksgiving novellas. I believe I read those in either 2020 or 2021. And then I believe it was last year I realized that they were interconnected to a whole nother series, and so I started reading that series from the beginning, and I stopped, and now I am on just finished the 3rd book. So the 3rd book follows Nora and Khalil. It is called An Ounce of Decorum. These two meet in a previous book, and they can't stand each other. They don't get along. They constantly have something smart to say to each other. And at some point in the very beginning, this is what I love about Ashley. She writes these really funny, hilarious characters that I think are so true to life. So Khalil basically calls Nora up and basically tells her, shut the fuck up, get your shit together. You're supposed to be grown. You have to deal with me because we're working to close on this property together, and I'm not dealing with your nasty attitude. So it kind of puts her in check. She's attracted to him, but she also doesn't like him. So when they go to the closing of this property, they get caught in this storm, and her cabin ends up flooding, so she has to go to his cabin. So we have this, not only this enemies to lovers trope, but also this forced proximity trope. So they're forced to live in this cabin together, and essentially, you know, things happen when Nora says, okay, so let's just fuck. And so they end up having really good chemistry. But what I really, really liked about the dynamic of their relationship is that they had to spend that time really getting to know each other, and both of them had been through a lot. And it really explains why Nora functions the way that she functions and why she's so difficult to get along with. Because if you don't know Nora as a character, I think when you initially come across her in this specific part of the series, she's not very likable. But I think when you hear about the issues that she's had with her ex and her best friend, you start to grow empathetic towards her and understand why she's so closed off and reserved for everyone, essentially, and why she doesn't trust anyone. But this was just a cute installment in the series. It was only 93 pages long. I think I'm gonna skip 4 and 5 because those are the two that I've already read, and then move on to the rest of the series. And I'm almost finished with the series, so I need to find another Ashley Nicole series to start. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next romance that I ended up reading was Safe With Me by Stephanie Nicole Norris, who's also one of my favorite Black indie romance writers. She has 2 series that I'm currently making my way through that I actually have already read 3 or 4 books in each one of the series, but I'm going back and rereading them because it's been a while since I've read them. So I'm starting with the Falling for a Rose series, which follows the Rose brothers. And I think that this series is probably anywhere between 10 to 13 books long, but they're really short, like 200 pages a piece. And this first one follows Samaya and then Jonas Alexander Rose. This was a reread for me. I still ended up giving it 3.5 stars. It's a solid start to the series, but I think that Jonas just makes some really dumb decisions that are just, it's so illogical to the point that it's like it was created, he was forced to make these decisions in terms of like creative choices in the writing. He was forced to make these decisions because we needed some type of tension between the two of them that would lead to them figuring out that they were really in love and that they really cared about each other. But Samaya also is dealing with a really bad breakup with an ex who had been cheating on her and then proposed to somebody else. So she's reeling from that. Her and Jonas end up meeting and they have this instantaneous connection. I think that's one of the things about the Falling for a Rose series, which is interconnected to the In the Heart of a Valentine series, is that they're very much so insta love. So if you're not a big fan of insta love or insta attraction and the romance developing pretty quickly, then these are probably not going to be the books for you. But I do like the familial dynamics that end up happening in each one of these books, and each one of these books does set up the following books. So I'm rereading the second book in the series, and we meet both of the characters that are our love interests in the second book towards the end of the first book. So our heroine in the second book is close friends with Samaya. I mean, overall, like I said, it was a solid start. It's not my favorite by Stephanie Nicole Norris. If I still had to pick a favorite from her, it would be Stiff, which is the series that takes place at a sex club. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Falling for a Rose series does have a crossover at some point, or it could be In the Heart of Valentine. One of the two series has a crossover with this Stiff trilogy. And I think that book specifically takes place at a sex club. But she wrote that one really, really well. I love the sex club dynamic in that book. I probably will continue with that series sometime here this month or in the following month. But I think like this, it's a solid start. And so I'll be continuing the rest of the series throughout the month of February. All right, and the last Black romance book that I read this week was Jaw. And Jaw is, well, first of all, the title is always interesting to me because if you know, I have Jamaican heritage. And so Jaw is what is another name for God, which I thought was an interesting naming choice for this book. But Jaw is the second book in the Them Boys trilogy, and we are following Jaw and Trisha. We meet Trisha in set in a very interesting way. So when we meet Trisha in the first book, she's like very, I guess, like nosy and just that friend that like talks a lot. And it got to one point in set where our characters in set were having sex in a hotel and they left Trisha on the phone as they start having sex. So it's very interesting, like getting everything from her perspective in this book. We're not rehashing anything that happens in set, but it's just really interesting meeting her in this book after everything that we get to know about her in the first one. So this one is and was a tough one for me because it has cheating in it, which is not always my favorite trope to include in a romance book, and it depends on how it's done. I still ended up giving this one 3.5 stars because the complexity behind the cheating is what made it kind of hard for me to decide how I felt about it. So Trisha and Ja, their storyline is told in a very weird way, which was a hiccup for me. We meet them in flashbacks, like we get to see how they met, but the flashbacks are not really cohesive and don't always mesh with the main storyline. And I kind of felt like there was too many flashbacks. But we get to see that Trisha is with this guy who's been cheating on her for an extended period of time, and then he decides that he wants to get his act right. But at the same time, Trisha ends up meeting Ja, and they have amazing chemistry, amazing sexual encounters that are very emotionally heightened on both ends, and they begin this affair, and it's a long affair. And so in my head I'm thinking like, dang, okay, so Trisha's ex has been cheating on her and is not that great of a human at all, but wants to make things right, but is not really making things right. And then Trisha goes and she's cheating technically, but I don't know if I feel bad that she's cheating because her partner's already cheating. It's just really messy. I will say that the connections, the interconnectedness between all of the characters makes for some really messy and fun drama. But I think that the way that this one was written, it's not the strongest of the group. I definitely understand why people have so many conflicting views on this one, because a lot of people who enjoyed Set, that gave Set like 4 or 5 stars, by the time they get to Ja, it starts dropping down to like 3.5. And I understand that because a lot of people don't enjoy the cheating element, but I also think the flashback element had a lot to do with it as well. Like, I think a lot of people also don't like the flashbacks. I do like flashbacks, but I think the way that they were written in this book and how they were included, I wasn't a huge fan of. But I do like the supportive nature that we get from Ja, especially when Trisha starts to open up about the dynamics of her relationship and how she's been treated. And Ja is very much so like, you may have a man, but you know your belongs to me. And so there's that. The sex scenes were amazing, hot, steamy as always. Like I said, very emotionally heightened, and I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. The next one that I ended up meeting was Meet Yasmin, which is another transitional reader. So I've been reading a lot of transitional readers, which are books that are not beginner readers, but also not long chapter books. I have the physical copy. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere around here. Anyway, so I ended up meeting Meet Yasmin. It is actually a bind up of the first 4 Yasmin books, which is Yasmin the Explorer, Yasmin the Builder, Yasmin the Painter, and Yasmin the Fashionista. I really enjoyed this. I think that it's engaging. It was fun. The illustrations work so well with it. I think any kid that's looking for a chapter book, or looking for ways to step into chapter books but are not really ready for those longer chapter books, I would recommend them because they don't have that much text on page, but they still build and encourage reading skills. I think that Yasmin is such a fun character. You get to know her, her family, her interests, her hobbies. You get to see her meet challenges and, you know, learn more about herself. It's really great. I think that even when I say transitional reader, like even less text than what you would find in a Magic Treehouse book. And I wish that I had my copy of Meet Yasmin so I could show you what I'm talking about. But it's definitely less text on pages, more illustrations, and shorter chapter books. But it's a way to transition readers out of beginner readers into more text heavy books before they even step into things like Magic Treehouse. But I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to continuing the series, and I ended up giving that one 4 out of 5 stars. So here we are, because everybody's looking for my thoughts on this. I had shared this a lot when I was on Instagram, and I was getting a lot of DMs about why I was reading this book and my thoughts and opinions on this. I was doing a lot of updates on Goodreads and was getting a lot of feedback on there. So I ended up reading Pence's memoir / what I consider to be political nonfiction, So Help Me God. This book is over 500 pages, and it was a heck of an experience. So a lot of people ask me, like, why do I read books, especially with opposing viewpoints? I love political nonfiction. I was a history major. It's something that I'm really into. And I think that in order for me to be well versed on what both political parties are thinking, I have to read across the aisle. So I'm not just going to read political nonfiction that's written by Dems. I'm also going to be reading political nonfiction that's written by Republicans. And it doesn't really bother me as much as I think people think it is. I don't read these books for clickbait. I don't read these books expecting to dislike them, because sometimes I do find certain points or angles that they come from that I agree with. Like with Kellyanne Conway's book. I'm not a Kellyanne Conway fan. But Kellyanne Conway did make some points in her book that I fundamentally did agree with. Most of it I did not, but there were pieces and bits that I was like, I could respect and understand where she was coming from. My experience reading Pence's book was very interesting because I was interested in learning so much about his background and his political career prior to becoming vice president. And that part was in some ways interesting, but there were so many different things that I just didn't necessarily sit with me the right way. So if you did not know, Trump pretty much threw Pence under the bus when it came to the 2020 election and the insurrection on January 6th. And because he wanted Pence to halt the counting of the electoral votes and essentially try to swing the election in his favor. Whatever, I knew he was going to talk about it. What I didn't expect was for this book to be written in pure defense of the Trump administration. And I guess I say that because he was very, and I don't want to say he was damning other people, but he was very critical of other politicians. And I expected him to hold that same standard with Trump, but it was almost like he would criticize him and then walk it back and be like, well, I mean, like, you know, I didn't agree with this, but he's not that bad. And so it was relatively confusing, because if you're going to hold politicians to the standards where you expect them to do what you consider to be morally right, down to the letter of the law, just anything that's in the best interest of the people, and you criticize them, it's not the criticizing that I have issue with, because every one of these politicians is writing a criticism of whoever they oppose. But I feel like there's a difference between saying, okay, I don't agree with what you're saying, and you're holding everybody accountable for their actions, then you're holding only one group accountable for their actions. And because you don't want to fall out of favor with Trump, you're going to hold him accountable, but then never mind, I'm going to walk it back and not really hold him accountable because I don't want to piss off his voting base. And I feel like a lot of what these past memoirs and political nonfiction has been is, I want to hold this man accountable for what he's done and decisions that he's made that I don't agree with, but I don't want to piss him off enough that I'm going to scare away his voting base. To me, that doesn't feel legit and that doesn't feel real, because if you're going to criticize everyone, hold everybody to the same standard. I don't mind reading about criticizing or politicians criticizing politicians that I don't take issue with. I think it's interesting, and I think it broadens my spectrum to different viewpoints and perspectives. I don't like nitpicking, or not nitpicking, I don't like cherry picking. We're going to cherry pick who we want to hold accountable and who we don't want to hold accountable. So this book read like a Trump apologist book. Another thing that I take issue with is, in the very beginning of the book, I came across this section where Pence was saying that he believes in traditional marriage. That is his right, and I'm not going to take that, I can't take that belief away from him. He was talking about a law specifically, and I wish I could remember the law, in which it protects what's considered traditional marriage between a man and a woman. And he said he wanted that to be in place in Indiana. He said that Biden has agreed with it, Obama has agreed with it, the whole 9 yards, whatever. He then delves into the fact that as soon as it was signed, they had big corporations, media, and people were trying to be woke before wokeism was a thing. Here's the thing. The term woke was established before Pence was even conceived. And so I don't like when people co-opt terminology that has already been in existence in order to push their own narrative and agenda. You're using the term woke and wokeism incorrectly. It was a term that was established before you were even thought of. And so wokeism can't be a thing before it was a thing, because it was a thing before you even existed on the planet. So it's perpetuating this term and this standard, this belief that people have co-opted to fit their political agendas and narratives, and I don't like that, neither from the left nor the right, because most people don't understand the history behind the term woke. People don't know that that is actually specific to the Black community, and white people have taken it and have kind of just run with it, and I don't like it. It's been this term now that's only applied to those who are considered to be socially liberal. And that's not what the term was established for. That's not why the Black community has used it. And it just makes me feel like Black people can't have a damn thing. We can't have nothing. Can't have not a thing. Another issue that I took with the book is that, call that man Trump. Pence says that he is a Christian first. What did he say? He's a Christian, a conservative, and then a Republican. That's the order that he does it. He's a Christian first, a conservative second, a Republican third. Whatever. I don't take issue with Pence's faith at all. I did not have an issue with Pence talking about his faith and how much he relies on his faith and how he was brought up in his faith and how he went from being Catholic to not necessarily practicing Catholicism, and how he allows his faith to kind of shape how he makes his decisions. The issues I have is that everyone doesn't share the same faith as Pence. So when you're making decisions based on your faith alone, are you making the best decisions for all people? Because the United States is quote unquote supposed to be a melting pot of various religions. So if you're only making decisions based on your Christian values, are you really serving all of your constituents? Are you serving all American people? I personally don't think that you are. He brought up an issue related to gun control, which I don't even want to delve into that, because that whole situation about gun control and his belief in reference to gun control and the Second Amendment, we just are going to fundamentally disagree with that. I think that this country needs to do a better job about gun control, because I should, as a parent, not feel nervous about sending my child to a public school in fear that somebody's going to bring a gun and shoot the place up. Especially when I just found out while finishing this book that 2 school districts that my child would be zoned to go to both received threats of violence within a 24-hour period. That to me is something that you need to revisit. That's not just as simple of, oh, I don't want to strip people of their Second Amendment rights, we need to figure out something else. No, we need to revisit everything on the whole. But anyway, that's my personal belief. I knew we weren't going to agree on that. He then brought up the fact that he doesn't understand why people get so offended when politicians say stuff like, oh, you're in our thoughts and prayers. I would get pissed if I'm a parent. I would get pissed if I'm a parent who's lost their child, and the only thing that a politician can say to me is, you're in my thoughts and prayers. No, I don't want your fucking thoughts and prayers, because 1, I've just lost my child. Your thoughts and prayers are not going to do shit for me. 2, you could be doing something with action. I don't want your thoughts and prayers. 3, how do you know that everybody that has lost a child to gun violence shares the same faith as you? You can't assume. That's the issue that I have with him, is that he automatically assumes that everyone shares his faith and beliefs, and that's not true. It's not saying that he can't have his own faith and beliefs. It's not saying that he can't express his faith and beliefs. It's not saying that he can't talk about it or share it. But assuming that everyone shares the same things as you, I think is dangerous. And he does in every decision that he makes. He talks a lot. I know I had a couple questions. People like, does he talk about his wife? in the weird way that he continuously talks about his wife. And no, he doesn't. He does talk about the fly incident at the debate, where he said he didn't even notice that the fly was on his head. He just knew that there was a fly at some point, but he didn't notice that a fly was on his head at any point. I think that's probably like one of the most, oh no, the other one that he talked about was when he went to, did he go to the CDC? No, he went to, oh y'all, he went to some medical place, and I can't remember, it's slipping my mind right now. He went to some medical facility and did not wear a mask, and he was highly criticized for not wearing a mask while there. And he said the reason why he didn't wear a mask is because he had been tested and his test for COVID had come back negative. But he apologized in the book and said, regardless of whether he had been tested, the right thing to do would have been to wear a mask. So at some points, I feel like Pence takes accountability for some things. He does talk about the fact that him and Trump had some disagreements. Like, he didn't always agree with what Trump did in terms of the decisions that he made, whether it was in, you know, trying to get a handle on COVID, or whether it was, you know, talking about immigration and talking about how that is related to terrorism, which we know how that whole situation went. So it's like he addresses, it was just a weird read, because it's almost like he addresses the issues with the administration, but he didn't want to offend Trump. And I don't know if that speaks to his character or not, or whether it speaks to his wish to possibly run for president. I just don't think that he would ever at this point be the Republican nominee. I think that vice president is as high as he's going to go, especially when you have Trump running again. Nikki Haley is about to announce her bid to run as the Republican nominee. There's still this possibility that DeSantis is going, which is my biggest fear, is for DeSantis to run. I also think that Pence claimed a lot of economic things, especially in terms of the Black community, that he shouldn't have gotten credit for. What's always interesting, and a lot, if you talk to economists, Trump took credit for a lot of the influx of the economy and what was benefiting the Black community at the time, based off of an economy that was already revving up by the time he took office. You kind of have to take into consideration what the economy was with the president that was sitting prior to the current president. You're not going to see all of the impact of what a president has done in the economy in their term alone. And so there were some left off from the Biden administration that Trump was claiming was a part of his goals for the for his administration. I think that it's also very important to take into consideration the rate at which unemployment is increasing or decreasing for the Black community. While it may have risen at one point, you have the pandemic and our unemployment rates rose again, and they haven't dropped as quickly as our white counterparts. So I think that there's ways to cherry pick information and paint this specific picture of what you're doing and what you're not doing when the numbers don't really say the same thing. And I think Pence kind of did the same thing. You know, you're talking about HBCUs and Trump saving HBCUs, but the funding that Trump gave HBCUs is the same, literally the same amount that Obama was giving to HBCUs. So it's just a lot of those claims about what they did for the Black community is always very amusing to me. And it's always like, okay, they had the highest number of Black constituents to come and vote for them. But you also have to understand, like, when we're coming down to what Black constituents are voting for you, it's a lot of Black men that have voted for Trump and Pence. You will not find many Black women who do, and Black women are often the group that mobilize voting amongst the Black community. So anyway, either way, no community is a monolith. But yeah, it was just a very, very interesting thing to hear him criticize some things, but also walk back for the sake of, I guess, his relationship with Trump. And he did quote, which I thought that this was like, it makes me question like the dynamics of their relationship, because there's one specific line in the book where he was like, because it was in relation to what was happening with the 2020 election, and Pence was about to walk out of his office because Trump made some wild comment that was pretty kind of below the belt. And Pence was like, you know what? Outside of your family, you know I have been your #1 supporter in this administration. And I'm like, it was like this bromance thing going on between the two of them. And Pence was low-key kind of pissed, like, you throwing me under the bus and I've been your #1 supporter. I've had your back this entire time. How are you gonna treat me like this? So I mean, I didn't rate it. I don't think I'm going to rate it. It was 21 hours of listening to his voice, which actually wasn't as bad as I think people think it was. Listening to Kellyanne was a tad bit more on the ears than listening to Pence read his own book for 21 hours. But it's very religious. If you are not a person, because every chapter opens up with a verse from the Bible. And every verse is applicable to the situation that he's going to discuss. It's tough. It's if you're not a religious person or you don't want to hear about Pence and Christianity and how the two work together, this is not going to be the memoir for you. I know a lot of people are not going to read it because it's Pence. A lot of people are going to be like, oh my God, Ashley, you're doing the Lord's work. But I'm telling you, I was genuinely interested. I actually am in the process of listening to Tim Scott's book, which has me questioning some things about myself, because Tim Scott's book is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. And Tim Scott is very close with Lindsey Graham, and I like Lindsey Graham, and I don't like Lindsey Graham at all. I don't like I don't like Lindsey Graham in the least bit. You want to talk about a flip-flopper? Like, Lindsey Graham hated Trump. And then him and Trump were all of a sudden golfing together. Lindsey Graham to me is just trying to make sure that he stays in office for as long as possible. But Tim Scott's book is really interesting. I did not know that we shared some of the same background. So yeah, that's so help me God. My first update on Goodreads was so help me God as I try to make my way through this book. And I made it through 500 plus pages of Pence. And the last thing that I ended up reading this week was Promise Boys by Nick Brooks, which is one of the highs of this video. I'm really like, y'all, this book is so good. So I was nervous about this one because it follows 3 boys who attend Urban Promise Prep, and this school is supposed to have them on a straight and narrow path, getting them into college, and then the principal ends up dead. And we have 3 boys of color who are framed as committing the murder of this principal. And so what's interesting about this one is I listened to it mainly on audio, and it's told from a lot of different perspectives. Not the main story, but you get kind of the outside perspectives of the situation from news reporters, people who attend the school, family members. And while I think some people will feel like, oh my gosh, like there's so much to include in the book, I think it was very intentional. And I think that it served its purpose, because what we're seeing here, what I was afraid of, that this was going to be just focused on, you know, Black and brown boys who are dealing with a judicial system, but it also dealt with this dynamic between adults and teenagers and the whole institution of school, and how beneficial is school really for teenagers, where a lot of times you have them in situations where they're confined to classrooms, they're confined to a chair. You have to breathe a certain way, you have to look a certain way, you can't do this, you can't do that. You get them into this place where it's so structured that it sucks them dry. And it's not so much about the teachers, because there are great teachers out there that make education fun and engaging, but it's the institution of education. There was a video that I'd watched on Facebook about how the institution of school can sometimes set up Black and brown boys down the path straight to issues and trouble, and respecting authority in a way that is unhealthy and unrealistic. And it's fear-based and not relationship-based, where you have people who are in charge that are interacting with these kids in a very positive way. It's very much so, sit straight, don't do this, don't do that, and if you do this and you do that, then you get this and that and that. Like, there were some instances we had one of our main characters who got in trouble for selling food at school, but he was using the money to help his abuela. And it was like, but this institution is supposed to be rewarding these kids for creativity. You know, that could have been used as a lesson on entrepreneurship or running your own business. And so a lot of that is the main structure. And that was not what I was expecting out of this. I don't know what I was thinking, because I didn't really read too much into the synopsis, but the fact that we got this conversation about the relationship of the institution of schooling as it applies to teenagers is a very interesting conversation that I think I haven't ever seen that, I think, in a teen book. And I think it's a conversation that needs to be happening more. And so we get the perspectives, the main part of the story is from the perspective of these three characters who each come from different backgrounds and are viewed in certain ways by these outside perspectives. So that's why I said the outside perspectives are really engaging and interesting. And while typically I think I've been like, oh my gosh, there's so many perspectives, it shows you how people perceive humans on the outside without really knowing what's going on internally, or what may be going on in terms of their home life, and how some students are pegged as like, oh, this kid doesn't behave, they're horrible, they're bad, not really knowing like what's going on at home. You're assuming that this kid is hustling and not doing good things by selling, you know, food at school, but you have no idea that he's trying to help his abuela at home. You don't know this kid that's a basketball star is actually going home to an abusive uncle. You know, it was so many layers to the story, and it is that conversation of what you see on the outside of people is not what's happening on the inside, which is why people often say you never know what someone's going through. And with these three characters, you just never knew what they were going through until you got their internal monologue. And it was very interesting too to see those people who are making rash judgments about them, and then those who are saying like, it can't be these kids. Like, I know for a fact you had a very supportive teacher who was pretty much like, it can't be these kids. I need you to figure out like what actually happened, because these kids just, it can't be them. Like, I know for a fact. So there's that support system while also criticizing. And I think Nick Brooks is a genius for that, because we have those supportive teachers working within a system itself that's failing. This very much so to me felt like a commentary on the structural capabilities or lack thereof of an educational system that exists in the United States, and having these schools that are supposed to make the world's next best leaders, but are we really, when we're not even allowing any form of creativity or existence or individuality, to be honest with you? And a lot of that is tied into who ends up being revealed as the killer of the principal, which I am very, very particular about not being able to figure out who has killed who whenever I'm reading any type of mystery or thriller. I did not know. I had so many people pegged as the killer of this man, and the way that it played out, I was like, I didn't even think about that. Like, that threw me for a complete loop. I will say that the writing was just beautifully done. Characterization, beautifully done. We just got a 360 really perspective of every single one of our main characters, and it was done not only with internal dialogue and getting perspectives of the characters, of our three main characters, from each other, and then, you know, you have their family and friends, and then you have people who are judging them, and it was a way to create well-rounded, well-defined characters that sometimes you don't always get in mystery and thrillers, because we're so focused on the plot that character development ends up falling short. But Nick Brooks did a hell of a job with this one. I knew that he had come out with a middle grade book last year, which I am going to retroactively go back and read, but this was good. This was good. So I'm so excited that Macmillan actually had asked me to be on tour for this. Today is my posting day, which it just happened to fall. It just happened to fall on the day in which I do my weekly logs. Enjoy this, definitely. 4 out of 5 stars. Excited to dive into what else Nick presents to us in the future. Okay, y'all, so this is a segment where I talk a little bit about what I'm currently reading, which I've already talked about. One of the books that I was reading, which is America, a Redemption Story by Tim Scott, Choosing Hope and Creating Unity. Hopefully I'll be finishing that this week. I am on the second book of the Falling for a Rose series by Stephanie Nicole Norris, which is Enough. I am also currently reading another Black romance book, which is All Alight, which is the first in the Firecracker Cousin series by A.H. Cunningham. So hopefully those are the three that I have lined up. I have a lot of other stuff that I plan on reading, but you know how I am. When I get to it, I get to it. All right, y'all, that's it. Let me know what you ended up reading this week. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to follow me on social media, or if you're looking for ways to support the channel, all the links will be down in the description box below. And I'll be back with another video soon.